Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to Splendid Isolation History number 52. And today we're going to be talking about the great British hero, Captain James Cook, Royal Navy, which I think should be interesting. Okay, as always, to give people time to join the stream, etc., I'm going to start us off with a tune.
Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye breed. Go bind your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need. To wait in heavy harness on flooded folk and wild. Your new God's sullen peoples have devil and have child. Take up the white man's burden, in patience to abide, to veil the threat of terror and check the show of pride. By open speech and simple, 100 times made plain, to seek another's profit and work another's gain. Take up the white man's burden, the savage wars of peace. Fill full the mouth of famine and bid the sickness cease. And when your goal is nearest, the end for others sought, what's love that heed and folly? Bring all your hopes to naught. Take up the white man's burden, no tawdry rule of kings, but toil of servant sweeper, the tale of common things. The ports ye shall not enter, the roads ye shall not tread. Go make them with your living and mark them with your dead. Take up the white man's burden and reap his old reward. The blame of those ye better, the hate of those ye guard. The cry of those ye humor are slowly towards the light. Why brought ye us from bondage, a loved Egyptian night? Take up the white man's burden, ye dare not stoop to less, nor call too loud on freedom to cloak your weariness. By all ye cry or whisper, by all ye leave or do, the silent, sullen people shall weigh your gods and you. Take up the white man's burden, have done with childish days, the lightly proffered laurel, the easy ungrudged praise. Come thou to search your manhood through all of thankless years, no age with
That was, of course, the excellent Chris Gard. I see a lot of people in our political circles these days saying that we should be creating right wing culture. Um, I would just say that Chris Gard is one of our friends, one of our good guys, and he is a genuine musician. So do go and support his channel on YouTube, and you can also follow him on X on Twitter, where we are also live at the moment. Okay, so we're going to be looking at the life and career of Captain James Cook, Royal Navy, today. He was born in Yorkshire, although his father was actually a Scotsman. But he was born in Yorkshire, and his father was a farm labourer initially. He eventually became a farm manager. He was promoted. And Cook was able to go to school because the owner of the farm that his father worked on as a labourer basically paid for him to go to a local charitable school. Um, so Cook obviously learned to read and write and do his basic arithmetic there, which is basically what they used to teach kids in those days. This was in 1728.
Hmm.
His mother was an English woman from Yorkshire. Um,
Yeah, they lived because he was born in North Riding of Yorkshire. Most of his that was where the his family and grew up, sort of came from. Obviously, apart from his father Scottish, 'cause he came from I think it was the border region. I think it was Roxburghshire originally, but the farm that he grew up on was where his father became manager, was a farm at Great Ayton, which I have been to, no less. Or I've been through Great Ayton on the way to
oh,
uh, our holidays and
I don't,
numerous times.
I don't know if you know this, William. You might. There's a Captain Cook's cottage in Melbourne, in a park in Melbourne, in Australia,
Yes,
and it
yeah.
was moved from England. But I don't know if that's his original house that he was born in or what. I don't know if you know.
I think the one in Melbourne is I think it's actually the house or property from I think it was when he was living where he had a property in the south. I don't think it's the original one from Yorkshire. Um,
Because I think that one's still there, isn't it?
yes, it is. Yeah. The one at Airy Home Farm in Great Ayton, I believe it's still there. Yes. I think the farm has changed a bit, so I don't know what the property layout is of the farm, but I believe there is a blue plaque there, so it is a point. Though the two main places where there's particularly the latter, which I've been to a few times now, is um uh, Stythes, which is a fishing village in um well, not too far, about 8 miles from of the farm he grew up on the coast, and of course Whitby, which would be and if you go to Whitby today, there's a lot of well, last time I went there, you had a lot of references. There's a lot of bits there on, apart from like Dracula and all that sort of stuff, but also that of Captain Cook. Being uh the place where he met he first became um found his calling, to the sea. Though this was in a with the Walkers, which was a um um a what was it? They were ship owners for the coal trade. That is how he got his fashion. But the thing is, he was quite old, and this is something I actually thought, Andrew, we did a stream about Captain Cook. We never did. We have talked about him through, when we talked about the conquest of New France and the 7 Years' War of Quebec, and on various occasions we have talked about him in on numerous occasions, but we've not actually covered his life
Uh, uh,
on this channel.
No, no, absolutely. He when he was 16, he was apprenticed to a shopkeeper who basically
Yeah,
ran a grocery and
w-
habit shop in uh,
Styes.
Stay, yeah, which is a fishing village.
Yeah,
Um,
and the shopkeeper was
Surprisingly,
really.
I was just going to say, surprisingly, Cook didn't do too well as a shop boy. He didn't
Yeah.
like it basically. So,
He was also accused of stealing. The story goes, and this is what I heard when I was up there. And I don't know if this is like a local legend. A say a sailor who was with the Walkers, with John and Henry Walker, who were friends of the shopkeeper, the shop owner that he was apprentice under, which was William Sanderson, um, had like a freshly minted um coin, which was I can't remember what it was. It was a you know quite a sort of I think, I mean, it may have been a foreign coin or something, but it was obviously something that was quite important and high value and very rare. And supposedly the shopkeeper, when it was given to um, uh, Cook to just to look at, the shopkeeper, and he saw Cook put it in his pocket. The shopkeeper thought he was like basically taking out the till, and they had a blazing row, and well, that was the end of that arrangement.
well, the story that I read is that it was the shop owner that actually had a friend, the chap you mentioned earlier, who ran sailing colliers from basically the Tyne River down to London with
Yeah,
coal. And it was the shop owner who was friends with the dude who owned these ships. And because he could see that Cook was not going to be a successful shopkeeper, basically,
yeah.
he introduced him to the ship owner, and the dude took him on just as kind of like a ship's
Mm.
boy, basically.
Yeah, because he had one thing that was because of his education as a child, when by the farm that he grew up on, he had a basic understanding of mathematics and also the sciences as well, which was as we go into his future endeavors, would be very important for trigonometry, navigation, and so on and so forth, and geometry, and cartography, which would be his, what probably arguably the most famous, important cartographers in history. Uh, Forget about his naval adventures for a second. Yeah, he is um, the most famous.
Oh yeah, he's one of the outstanding navigators and one of the outstanding explorers. But also, he was very early in the field of making very accurate charts, which we'll talk
Yeah,
about in a bit. Um, but yeah, he basically he joins this merchant ship, taking coal from the Tyne down to London and back as a 16, 17-year old boy, which was like relatively old actually to go to sea in those days. Quite often, people would go to sea earlier than that.
that's what I find. The reason why I'm quite drawn to Cook in some ways is because of how unlikely he is. Because this is probably, if you look, we looked at Nelson and other figures, they go to sea at what,
Well, I
8,
think
10, 10, 11, something like that. There's like it's quite young, and
I think Nelson went to sea when he was about 13 or 14. But
13, 14.
that wasn't the youngest. I mean, you did get guys going to sea younger than that sometimes. Yes.
As a career. And the thing is, he was, set for a shop assistant, maybe even future like a clerical work or something like that. There's nothing in his family of his father side or anything like that that had any. Unlike Nelson, who had his uncle, there's no one in his family who had any connection to, the navy, merchant navy. And I honestly think, he's probably one of the most remarkable figures that, and that you have of this age, of these people who sort of have very humble, obscure backgrounds, and able to, achieve this sort of great man archetype figure of this British adventurer. I mean, growing up, whenever you think of like a historical British adventurer, Captain Cook, he's up there with, you know with the rest of them, with Livingston. In many ways, I would even
Yeah,
compare him
he's
to.
Cook, I would say, is up there with the likes of Nelson and Drake and as great
Cecil
British
Rhodes.
seafarers. Yeah, but I'm talking
And
about
oh yeah,
seafarers particularly.
yeah, but as I mean, the thing is, I mean, obviously Australia or particularly Australia, New Zealand, but also he would chart the countless Polynesian islands. He would chart the Pacific Ocean. Um,
Well, one of the things that's interesting about Cook is that not only is he an important figure in British history, he plays a very important part in Canadian history, Australian history, and New Zealand history as well. So, yeah, very
yeah,
true.
and even in some ways Hawaiian history, and the countless former
Well,
imperial
those
conquerors.
bastards killed him, but yes, okay.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. I am told there is like a small, like a shrine, like there's like a shrine or memorial to Cook on the beach where he was killed, in Hawaii.
Could be, could be. But anyway, let's take it back
Yeah,
a little bit. James Cook spent nearly 6 years in the Merchant Navy. He did a 3-year apprenticeship, which took him from being basically a boy seaman to being an able seaman. And during this time, he also starts to learn, as you said earlier, William. He starts to learn things like algebra, trigonometry, navigation, astronomy, geometry, all things that you needed to be able to do navigation in those days. And his first ship was called the Free Love, the first ship he served aboard. But then, after he completes his apprenticeship, which is basically going up and down the east coast of England from the Tyne River to the Thames, um, he then gets onto a merchant ship that spends most of its time in the Baltic Sea. But also, so he goes to places like Norway and what have you, but he's also visiting the Netherlands. He goes up and down the Irish Sea sometimes in between England and Ireland. And of course, all this time, he's improving his ability to navigate and all the rest of it. And altogether, he spends about 6 years in the merchant service. Now, he was then offered, by this time, he'd been promoted to being the mate of his ship, which is kind of like the main guy after the skipper on a merchant ship in those days. And he was offered his own command in the merchant navy, but instead of taking this, Cook decides that he's going to go down to London and he's going to enlist in the Royal Navy at Wapping, and that's what he does. Why are you here twice, William? There you go. You're muted, by the way, William.
hello. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, now I can hear you. There were two of you for a little while, but now I can hear you.
Yeah. No, I am here twice.
So yeah, he Cook goes down to Wapping in London and he enlists in the Royal Navy, and he enlists in the Royal Navy as an able seaman. So he's taking a considerable dive because he was the mate of his merchant ship, and he'd just been offered command of a merchant ship and turned it down. And instead of getting command of a merchant ship, which I think most people would have taken, he goes down to Wapping in London. and joins the Royal Navy as an able seaman. Now, he doesn't stay an able seaman for very long. He's promoted fairly quickly because he's got all these navigational skills and all the rest of it already from his merchant navy career. So he's fairly quickly promoted to master's mate, and a master's mate, that was the normal way that an ordinary seaman in the Royal Navy would get promoted, because master's mates were pretty much the same as midshipmen in terms of rank. But it was the way talented ordinary sailors, and obviously they had to be able to read and write and do quite complicated mathematics and the rest of it. But if they could do that, then in the Royal Navy you'd be made a master's mate, and from master's mate you could be commissioned. Cook is eventually commissioned. Obviously, he ends up being captain, but not initially. But a master's mate is, as I say, basically in all respects are treated pretty much the same as a midshipman on a Royal Navy ship. Anything you want to add to that one, William?
I would. To be honest, no. I think you sort of covered that bit well. I think it is worth noting that at this time he was, when he was in Whitby, he was studying as well as doing his I guess you'd say doing his sort of like his collier duties as well. So he was studying as well to get, I believe it was it the sailing license or
Yeah, no, I thought I explained that, but maybe you missed it, William, because when you were having some problems. Yeah, he did a 3-year apprenticeship, which took him from being basically a ship's boy to being an able seaman. But then he eventually got his mariner's ticket. And as I said, before he left the merchant navy, he was the mate on a merchant ship, and the mate is the guy directly below the captain on a merchant ship. And he was offered command of his own merchant ship, and turned it down. Went down to London and joined the Royal Navy as an able seaman. So he took a considerable dive in his prestige to do this, but he did not stay an able seaman in the Royal Navy for very long, because he had all these qualifications and all the rest of it. And so he was fairly soon made a master's mate, which, as I was trying to explain, was the normal method for ordinary Royal Navy sailors to get a commission. And a master's mate on a Royal Navy ship was pretty much the same as a midshipman and was treated in the same way. They messed together and all the rest of it, yeah? Like the master's mates and the midshipmen all messed in the gun room on a Royal Navy ship. So he does this. And he's on a ship called, let me think, what was it? Hang on, let me look it up. I think it was HMS Eagle. Yes, it was. It was HMS Eagle, which was a 50-gun ship under a captain called Hugh Palliser, who was a pretty prominent Royal Navy officer. And he liked Cook. Cook was also there when Palliser captured a bigger French ship in the Eagle. Cook was in that battle. And following the death of the bosun on the Eagle, Cook was unofficially promoted into that role by the captain. So he became the bosun on a Royal Navy ship in those days, you could kind of describe him as the senior NCO on the ship. Yeah, that would be the best way to describe a bosun in the Royal Navy in the 18th and early 19th century. He was kind of like the senior NCO of the ship. But as William said, all this time, Cook is still studying his books. he's still learning navigation and all the rest of it. So Cook is constantly adding to his knowledge.
Sorry, Andrew, can you hear me still clearly on here?
Yes.
I've had to change my mic. I've just had to change my mic around.
Yeah, it's a little bit quieter than it was, but I can still hear you. It's a little bit.
Yeah. How's this now?
Yeah, that's better. Yeah, that's better.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
better.
Yeah. I was just gonna. Sorry, my mic's been. I've got a new mic, and it's not. Yeah. So. Yeah. Yeah. So at the time he was still studying, and just talk about now. When was the we talk about his unofficial promotion now? In he briefly was in command. I believe it was in March of 1756. He was briefly in charge of the cruiser, which was a small cutter that was attached to the Eagle. Have you got anything to mention on that?
Yeah, no, that was quite common in the Navy. If you were a promising young chap, and the ship you were on had some sort of vessel attached to it, like it was called a tender, and you had a small vessel attached to your ship. It was quite common for a promising young chap to be put in charge of that, to see what he could do in command of a small vessel, you know.
And I'm just wondering, Andrew, would Captain Hugh Palliser, would he have been evaluating him on his, I guess you could say, small brief command on the cruiser?
Yeah, and not only that, when Cook was the master's mate, he would have been expected to keep a journal every day, which would include things like the noonday sights and all the rest of it. So the position of the ship and all this, and the captain used to inspect those books. He at least once a week he would inspect all the midshipmen and master's mates' journals to see whether they were keeping an accurate record, whether they were keeping a record of what the sea state was, what the weather was, all this kind of stuff, you know.
I get from with James Cook, with Captain Cook at this point, he has this ability to be a very, very fast learner. He has like the already built in interest in, and this is from his childhood days, and there's been various books on biographies of him that shows that he has a very keen interest in the maths and sciences, particularly, but also in the more detailed like algebra and things like that. But it, I guess for him, he really had to learn all the naval the framework of actually being in the navy, but also like the general jargon and the world that entails, and the fact that he is, as you mentioned, he was a bit older as well, and so he's having to it is a very short space of time, relatively speaking, where he's learning quite a lot of you know uh
That's true, William. But don't forget, he'd been in the merchant service for 6 years. Yeah, and then he joins the Royal Navy in 1755, and he's in a fairly major action. The warship he's serving on, HMS Eagle, captured one French ship and sank another in this battle that Cook was part of. And then he's put in charge of this little tender, the HMS Cruiser, the little small cutter that's attached to Eagle. And then in 1757, so by this time, he's had 6 years in the merchant service, he's had 2 years in the Royal Navy,
in the
And
Navy. Yeah.
in 1757, he passes his master's examination at Trinity House in Deptford in London in those days. I'm not sure if it's still in Deptford. I used to live near Deptford, actually. But anyway, and there was a big Royal Navy dockyard there in the 18th and 19th centuries. But anyway, he passes his master's examination, and this means he can become the master of a Royal Navy ship. Now, that's the sailing master. It doesn't mean he's the captain. He's not. Every Royal Navy ship had a captain, of course, but it also had a sailing master. If it was big enough, it had a sailing master. If it was a small enough ship, then the lieutenant in charge might also be the sailing master. But on rated ships, so frigates and above, the ship would have a captain, but it would also have a sailing master, and the sailing master obviously was responsible for navigation mainly under the captain. You know, you did have a few captains, not many, who were not very good at navigation and relied very heavily on their sailing masters. But there weren't many of those because
Yeah.
they didn't
Yeah.
last long. They didn't last long. But anyway, so
Yeah.
Cook at this stage is qualified to be a sailing master, and of course, in 1757, the 7 Years' War breaks out, and Cook is by this time serving on HMS Pembroke, um, which is a fourth-rate Royal Navy vessel, and he takes part in the amphibious assault that captured the fortress of Louisburg in Nova
Yeah.
Scotia from the
I've got
French in 1758.
Yeah, I've got a hand-drawn chart of Gaspee Bay, created by Cook in 1758. So it's a relatively early one. I'll
Well,
just share it.
if you want to put it up, yeah, you can put it up by all means. This is where Cook starts to really make his name, and it is for stuff like this. It's drawing really accurate charts, and of
I
course,
mean,
one of the
it does get better. His quality, as they say, gets better
oh
very, very
yeah,
quickly.
sure.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
the important thing about naval charts is that you're not only putting in an accurate picture of the coast, but you have to put in all the depth, because obviously, if you don't know the depth of water under you, this is when particularly bigger ships can run aground. So you'll notice all the little markings on that map are the depths of various places in the water. And he also marks the tidal difference, places where the tide goes up and down, and all this kind of stuff. It's
mm,
quite a complicated process. And of course,
yeah,
if you're doing this in wartime, you're doing it in an open rowboat. You're using a lead weight with tallow in the bottom, so you can see what the bottom is like. You drop that onto the bottom of the sea, and when you pull it up, you can see whether it's a sandy bottom or a shelly bottom or mud or whatever, depending on what comes up in the tallow. And it's also where we get the saying swinging the lead, because you're standing there and you're literally swinging the lead out ahead of your boat or ship. And somehow that became known as being lazy. I'm not quite sure how, but anyway, I guess because you were standing in one place and not falling on a rope or something. Um, but yeah, it's and obviously in wartime when you're doing this and you're doing it in an open boat next to a French fortification, the French are going to be firing at you while you're
yeah.
doing it. So it's not an easy job at all.
Yeah. Now, this particular map is also the pure purpose of this isn't. I mean, this is about particularly this particular map is finding an appropriate place for infantry to land. Uh, this particular at Gaspee Bay, this is looking for and you as Duke mentioned, you have the various um, markations on there on depth, and of course it has a rocky one because the worst thing you can do, as you mentioned, is for troops to be stuck or run aground or be or the tide to push them against away from a landing zone, and also, as you mentioned, the constant fire, and the Cook was on what at this point we discussed in our stream on the conquest of French Canada and Quebec, and we talked about a bit of Newfoundland as well. Yeah, Cook was under constant fire. He was, and he wrote about it in his journal. He wrote about how on numerous occasions it was difficult because they on the rowing boats he would have to constantly duck because there would be the odd um, you know musket and relatively close as well. They were definitely within firing range.
Yeah, cannonballs as well as musket shots for sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think even Cook.
Cook was a brave guy for sure. He was in quite a number of battles and fights in his career.
Yeah, Cook. He even. I mean, he's. I think in one of the biography books I got on the life of Captain Cook, he even talks about how at this particular time when he was on a boat, he was close enough. He could see. At this point, what the French had done is outside the fort, they had had like these fortification bits in the bay, and he could even see French troops running around on outside the fort, towards the edge of the beach. So he was in close enough range that he could see, the French soldiers running about and trying to take pot shots towards them. So it was very dangerous to but to do, and very uh,
Absolutely. And after the fall of Louisburg, Cook meets an army officer, an engineer, a royal engineer. And this chap is using a plane table. Now, I'm not going to get very technical on this stream, but a plane table is something that surveyors use. I don't know if you know much about this stuff, William,
I yes
but if you
yeah, I
do,
do. Yeah, yeah.
do
So
chime in.
um yeah, so he met this I'm trying to remember his name now. um uh Hold on a sec, let me just see if I can I'll just try to see if I can find his name very quickly. um
It was Samuel Holland, William.
That was it, Samuel Holland. Yeah. So yeah, he met. This was after the fall and on the beach, and he met Samuel Holland, who had this, as you mentioned, plane table to survey the area. Now, um, just to describe um, a plane table, um, is it's a I'm just trying to just find the best way.
So
It's a very
surveyors still use them, by the way.
it's still
In
yeah.
more modern versions, they still use them. So yeah.
Um, so what it does, what makes it different from like your regular map, is it's kind of like the contours, but also um uh the actual, it represents the actual surface of so if we bring up if you think of like the map of actually hold on, let me bring up a map of Newfoundland a sec, so I can, it'd probably be the better way of me describing it this way, because you can probably see like this is like the end result, right? Okay. Um, if you could share that, Duke. All right. So if you see on now, this is Cook. This was Sam, partly. I mean, partly Cook as well, but I think Samuel Holland and others. And so this is Newfoundland. And if you look on the map here, it's not just like a bog standard map, but it also has
I think it's Newfoundland, by the way, William. It's pronounced.
yeah, Newfoundland. It has the um, contours. It has information on the rivers, a sort of a river network, but also the various inland peninsulas, bays, harbors, and and also you see like the depth maps as well. You see in the ocean there, sort of like a form of depth ones. But also this it's not a flat map. It's not a map which is just a bog standard, you know, line of where they think this is designed to be a detailed map on every river, every stream, every bit of detail, and even in some cases when they've done I think probably I'm just trying to think. I think later on in the century, in the following in the 19th century, when they were like charting of Africa, you'd even have like jungles, forests, and all that sort of thing, savannas, and it would even talk about the topography of the landscape. And this is what Samuel Holland was doing, and this was something that was introduced to um, Cook on that beach just after the fall of Louisburg. And this is something that he would be trained to do. Um, this would be his and this is partly his work.
But the point I was trying to make, William, is that the Navy didn't really use plane tables at this time,
No,
but Cook immediately really gets on with this British Army Royal Engineer chap because they're kind of doing the same sort of thing. And Cook is able to learn stuff from this that other naval officers at that time don't do. So he's added another feather to his cap, if you see what I mean.
yeah, it's quite incredible because the reason, I mean, one of the reasons why is it was the Royal Society were very much interested in this, but there was also the political interest from the government, particularly on this newly acquired land in North America, and also more importantly, and this is something the French, they did chart, there were forms of surveying in I guess what's now Ontario, parts of Alberta. The French did do a lot of surveying of the Mississippi River, you know, given that it would connect their colony there in Louisiana all the way up to New France. But there really wasn't that much in the way of North Atlantic in what is now Nova Scotia, or back in this time would have been Arcadia. So
Yeah, yeah. It's worth pointing out that after the 7 Years' War, Cook spends, I'm not sure, it was 4 or 5 years charting Newfoundland, which is the map that William has put up for us there. And to get that chart, and there are much more detailed, smaller charts, of course, that go with it that Cook also did. To get that, that's 4 or 5 years' work.
yeah, and that uses another method as well, a different method as well, which is um, hydrography, which is particularly talks about features of ocean, seas, and coastal areas, and then, as I mentioned, rivers and lakes. This relies entirely on the knowledge of the circumference of the Earth, which at this time was quite relatively well known in the sense of um, you know we knew at this point obviously the Americas were known, both North South Americas were known um, for centuries up until this point, and as we'll get on to this with Australia, there was always believed that in the south there was of the planet there was a great continent, southern continent,
Terra Australis.
Terra Australis, right, and which we'll get back to that. So we knew that there was there was sort of a general knowledge of the circumference of the Earth, and what would help in this endeavor would be his first voyage, which was to the island of Tahiti, which again we will get back to on that because that was
Yeah,
the transition.
Can we take things back just a little bit, William?
Yeah.
In 1766, and this is important for Cook as well, there was a solar eclipse, and this is while Cook was in Newfoundland, and Cook um, took really precise records of the local time of the start and end of this eclipse, and he sent them back to England to an English astronomer called John Bevis. And Bevis was able to compare those with observations of the eclipse that were carried out in Oxford in England.
Yeah.
And this was really useful in calculating the actual longitude of where Cook was, because longitude was a big problem in the 18th century. We'll have to talk briefly about marine chronometers. And basically, what a marine chronometer is a very accurate clock. And you can set it to Greenwich Mean Time. And it's so accurate that even over a period of a year or more, it will only lose like a second or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't really use them much these days because we've got GPS and all the rest of it these days. But if there was ever a big EMP thing happening, an electromagnetic pulse, all that GPS shit would die. So you'd better still be able to know how to use longitude and latitude and all the rest of it. Latitude had been solved quite a while ago by taking star sights and noonday sun sights and this kind of stuff. But in order to overcome the longitude problem of navigation, you needed a marine chronometer. And in the early 18th century, the Royal Navy and the British government offered quite a lot of money for someone who could invent one. And eventually, a British guy did, and there was a guy called Harrison. He went through about 4 different versions, but his final one basically was a small clock in a box that was balanced so that when the ship tipped, the chronometer didn't. It stayed more or less level most of the time. And it was accurate enough, and there were things in marine chronometers which traditional non-electronic watches still use to this day. And Cook had one of these on some of his voyages. And they were very useful, and it meant you could work out your longitude by comparing Greenwich Mean Time at noon to local noon. If that makes sense to people in the chat, hopefully it does. William, does that make sense? I think it does.
Yes. Yeah. No, I understand what you mean, and this is this is sort of the key to unlocking the understanding of you know all aspects of the planet, and also the relation to time, time of the day, night and day-night cycles, particularly.
This is why, of course, in the whole of the forever really, up until about, I don't know, 1990 or something, on a ship, particularly on a Royal Navy ship, of course, the noonday sight was so important because that told you exactly where you were.
Mm.
You could use your sextant to work out the difference between Greenwich Mean Time and local time, and by that you could work out your longitude. As I said, latitude had been solved quite a long time before that, but longitude was a problem for a long time, and it was British genius that solved that problem, like so many others, to be honest.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, like the rest of the world operates on that to this day, with time zones, modern day time zones, and to some degree,
Yeah, Greenwich Mean Time is still, very important. If you're in the military, be it the British military or the American military or the Canadian military or whoever, they all basically use Zulu time, and Zulu time is Greenwich Mean Time, basically.
So, Andrew, if you look at your computer time now, what is the exact time at this moment?
8:52 a.m.
8:52. Okay, and so mine's 9:55 actually. So it's a bit
Yeah,
ahead. But it's
but I'm
actually
on top.
nine.
But I'm Thursday, of course.
You're Thursday. I'm still in Wednesday, and I'm 9:52 in the evening. So that just gives you, there you go.
But whilst we could do that, in a second at looking at our computer screens now, in Captain Cook's day, and for long afterwards, even in the Second World War, you couldn't do that. You had to calculate it. You could,
Yeah.
but only if you had an accurate marine chronometer, which is basically a very accurate clock.
Yeah. Which is why it's actually quite disconcerting, because if there was like a big EMP or like some sort of device or something, it would cause like a lot of problems.
Oh, it would. Yeah, it would. I don't know about the Royal Navy. I should ask my boy actually. But in the Merchant Navy, the only people who learn celestial navigation these days are people who do it as a hobby, because no one uses it anymore because of GPS.
Yeah.
I mean,
I did meet.
there are people who know it. Like when I worked for the marine pilots in the Torres Strait, there was one of our pilot boat skippers who did it, but he did it as a hobby just because he liked it.
Yeah. No, there was an old boy who was in the Merchant Navy in the 50s, late 40s, 50s, and he did that as well. But I don't know if it's done. It should be reintroduced. Yeah, that's something that should be reintroduced as precaution.
Well, yeah, I think, like I said, if there was a really major EMP, or, for example, satellites started getting knocked out in a war, which they would in a major war. I'm not talking about the likes of the Iranian thing going on at the moment. But
Yeah,
if you had
a
a big
tussle.
major
Yeah.
war between places like, the USA and China or what have you, then yeah, satellites would start getting taken out for sure. On both sides, probably. But yeah, interesting stuff. But anyway, Cook was a pioneer on this stuff. And as I hope we've shown, he was always looking to increase his knowledge. He took every opportunity, like, for example, with the eclipse of the sun, with the solar eclipse that we were talking about here, that he sent to the Royal Society in Britain, in England. And so, after the 7 Years' War ends, the Royal Navy has now got spare capacity to start doing things like exploration, not because they're not warfighting quite so much.
Yeah.
And this is when Cook gets his real big chance.
Also important, at this point, the search for the Northwest Passage is sort of finally put to bed in many respects by the Royal Navy. Because at this point, the search for the Northwest Passage had been going on since the 1600s, and even earlier in some cases. But for England, it was in the 1600s. And I remember Major General Richard Hilton talked about it in his Imperial Obituary as a this was like a one of the most long-term endeavors of state-sponsored adventure of Northwest Passage, and in reality there wasn't a such as a such thing, from sea to sea.
There's a video on this channel, William, that I did with Attelman actually, on the 1840s expedition, the Franklin expedition.
Oh yes.
Which I think is a pretty good video. I think people would enjoy it if they're interested. And this was another Royal Navy attempt to do the Northwest Passage with the HMS Erebus and Terror. I think that's a pretty good stream. So if you're interested in the Northwest Passage, go look that up. And that was in the 1840s. And of course, Franklin was another Royal Navy officer, of course. It was a Royal Navy expedition, and Franklin had fought at Trafalgar. And
Yes.
he'd also been the governor of Tasmania in Australia.
And so I guess going forward, because the war had ended, and it meant that resources were able to be rediverted, and in peacetime, you would have the Royal Navy and the Royal Society sort of collaborating with each other on this uh, dual expedition, and this would be known as the first voyage for James Cook. Um, where and this was, I'm just trying to think now, that this was there were a few British explorers that were sent to the um beforehand. I think this was in like between 1763 and 68. You had like the likes of Samuel Wallace and John Byron and uh, uh,
Yeah,
Cutler.
there were several expeditions sent
Yeah,
out,
Rival.
particularly to the Pacific, because it wasn't very well known then. It was on the other side of the
Yeah,
American continent. But also, uh, lost my train of thought. But also, no, sorry, I've totally lost my train of thought. You carry on, Molly.
yeah. No, and the reason I mention this is during with these sort of with like John Byron and Samuel Wallace and others, and this is something that they sort of got from the Polynesians, because they would, they're like Tahiti and stuff, and also other, like traders and like Dutch, the various other sort of traders and um uh, Dutch, Chinese, all the other sort of type people out there at the Pacific at the time. They also got wind of, they reported a large landmass, which, from the Royal Society's point of view, and these men, they concluded that this would be the Terra Australis, which was the what again, this, I mean, this goes back to ancient Greece. This goes back to, in some ways, antiquity, as like this, this great southern continent, which was believed to exist. And because of this feedback that they're, I think they even used the term credible, that they spoke to multiple, not just, the locals, but the natives and what have you, but the other powers and people reporting the same thing. That it was, the general view was that okay, this, there is a continent, a great Southland continent, and then this was, I guess this was like set the go ahead for this operation. Now, the Royal Navy was, there was two things. The first thing was that the first voyage of Cook, on this, it was classed as a scientific voyage. Though I mean, the Royal Navy did have its other, reason. They wanted the presence in,
Yeah, Cook had secret orders that he was
yeah,
also to look for Terra Australis and also other places that he could claim for Britain, which is fair enough. It was an
yeah,
imperial age. The thing I was going to say earlier, William, is that if you're on any ship in the world today, any merchant ship from any country, any naval ship, including the US Navy, the charts that you mostly use are Admiralty charts. They're British Admiralty charts because the Royal Navy spent most of the second half of the 18th century and all of the 19th century, and indeed quite a lot of the 20th century, charting all the world's oceans. So almost everyone still relies on British Admiralty charts.
Yes.
That have sometimes been updated, but not always.
No, and so with the first voyage, then and the agreements being set out and Cook being selected, given the fact that he was both Royal Naval man, but also someone who was interested in and had connections with the Royal Society, so he was seen as this.
This Palliser guy that he first served with in the Royal Navy, the guy who made him the unofficial bosun on the ship. The Palliser was the guy who first suggested him to the Royal Society, by the way. And this was common in the Navy. If a naval officer had a competent subordinate who he trusted, he would put his name forward when people were looking for people.
Yes, and he after being put forward, he took his examination for the rank of lieutenant, which
which he was more than qualified to do by this stage because obviously he was a sailing master as we explained earlier.
Yeah, he couldn't do it before because of the conflict.
He was involved in a war, and then he was basically working on a ship, and it wasn't normal for a sailing master to be commissioned. That wasn't very common, to be honest. Normally, he could have been commissioned from master's mate to lieutenant. That was quite common. Okay, as I say, because I hope I got this across to people. A master's mate and a midshipman were pretty much the same thing, except a master's mate was normally a promoted ordinary sailor, whereas a midshipman was someone who came into the Navy because they knew a captain or something like that, you know?
Yes.
But they were pretty much the same rank. But Cook, again, and we've said this a couple of times, Cook was quite unusual in that he became a ship sailing master, but then was promoted to lieutenant, which is not very common. That didn't happen very often. Most sailing masters stayed as sailing masters.
It is, yes, it is definitely unusual. And what's quite interesting is the Admiralty asked Adam Hayes, who was the shipwright, to select a vessel for the expedition. He chose a merchant collier, the Earl of Pembroke. Bearing in mind, this was the first,
this is the exact same ship that Cook started his career on.
Yes,
that's the Merchant Navy.
Yeah, which is quite funny. Quite funny to think about.
The reason he chose them were several, but one of them was they had very big holds because they were designed to hold coal. So you wanted the biggest hold you could get to get all that coal into to take it down to London from Newcastle. So that meant you could carry a hell of a lot of supplies in a ship like that because the hold is so big. So you can put in loads of barrels of water, loads of salt pork, loads of biscuit, all this kind of stuff. Dried peas and all this stuff that they used to take with them. So it was good for that. They were also strongly built ships, obviously, because they're carrying coal, which is relatively heavy. So they're strongly built. That's a good thing if you're going to the far side of the world. And also, they were flat bombed. So if you are in, say, an estuary somewhere and the tide goes out and your ship settles, a frigate, for example, would tip over on one side because they're not flat bombed. But one of these coal ships was basically flat bottomed, and it would more or less settle on an even keel. So
Yeah.
this all made them very, very good for exploration. But I would also say one other thing to people who are listening to this. Um, in those days, to go from England to the Pacific and the areas that Captain Cook was commissioned to go and explore would be very much like going to the moon today. It really would. His first voyage was 3 years. They were going to be away 3 years.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, going back to I'll use this example in the film Master and Commander, for example. There's a scene in there where they are talking about outrunning the Acheron, right? And they go through Drake's Passage. Now, before Drake, it was the Straits of Magellan, and the Spanish, because the way the Spanish were, they would keep the secret. So even further back, maybe when we do a stream about Drake and him when he circumnavigated the globe, um, it was totally unknown. It was totally unknown, and even by this time, it was. I mean, they had because of the previous um, because of the previous who'd gone out to Tahiti and everything. There was no, but beyond that in the Pacific, particularly Terra Australis, they didn't. The other people like Byron and Co and Wallace, they just it was word of mouth from the locals. And of course the Earl of Pembroke, the collier, would then be renamed, refitted, renamed as the Endeavour, which is well, it is the
That's the
signature of
ship.
your
That's the ship I've just put up,
yes.
William, and that's the replica Endeavour, by the way. That is she is based in Sydney Harbour in New South Wales in Australia, but she's sailed all over the world. She's a very, very accurate replica. I've sailed on her, and I've also climbed her mainmast, which is the middle mast for anyone who doesn't know. And I only realised yesterday when I was talking about this on my Discord that was 25 years ago. I climbed her mainmast. Wow. But that's Captain Cook's ship. She was armed, by the way. She did have I think it was 16 6-pounder guns, quite small, but there was no war at the time, and so she only really needed to defend herself from revolting natives, like Tahitians and what have
Yeah,
you.
the,
But yeah,
there weren't but the thing is there weren't any like these part of the waters that they'd be going to. There weren't, to their knowledge, Spanish. There weren't any. I mean, the nearest ones they might come across would be Dutch,
oh, no,
not really.
there were Spanish, there were Dutch, there were French, but there was peace at this time, and also
But
in
not in
those
Terra,
days.
not in the not like towards Terra, going look towards Australia and New Zealand. I mean, and going that far,
No, no,
into
no.
the unknown.
But there were certainly Spanish ships on the west coast of South America. There were
Oh yeah, 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 yeah,
Dutch
yeah.
ships, as you rightly say, in what is now Indonesia, which used to be the Dutch East Indies. There were French ships around in those days too, still in that part of the world. But also, it's worth pointing out that the scientific expeditions like Cook's, because the 18th century was relatively civilized, they generally didn't hold people very long. In fact, there was a big fuss later in the 18th century because the explorer Matthew Flinders, another Royal Navy guy, first guy to circumnavigate Australia, Matthew Flinders was held by the French for a long time, and everyone thought that was a really bad deal because he was on a scientific expedition. He wasn't in a fighting ship.
Yeah. Um. So on the Endeavour, and this was this was sort of authorized by the Admiralty. The ship's company would comprise of 73 sailors and 12 Marines. Cook's second lieutenant was Zachary Hicks, and his third lieutenant was a John Gore, a 16. He was a 16-year naval veteran who'd already circumnavigated the world twice aboard HMS Dolphin. So that John Gore was the sort of had quite a big experience one. And then when it came to the Royal Society side, you had uh, uh, Astronomer Charles Green,
Sir Joseph Banks, of course.
who largely funded was sort of like the wealthiest but how much is it in today's money? It's like I think he's like a couple
It
million.
was it was a lot. It was a lot.
Yeah,
And
it was
and Cook initially had quite a lot of problems with Banks and his various hangers-on and staff. But he eventually they became friends, which is interesting.
yeah. Didn't Banks turn up at the Endeavour with like a bit like overpacked or something? I remember reading in his
He
in
did,
his
yes,
yeah,
and Cook had to tell him we can't carry all that.
yeah, and Banks was like, no, I'm paying for this. Put it on the ship. He said to the sailors. Yeah,
But the interesting thing is that Banks and Cook, who were two totally different men, they actually got on quite well in the end.
they
And
did. Well,
Banks likes Cook.
yeah. Now Banks also brought with him several naturalists. So that was Daniel Sonder and Herman Sporing, and also
And one or two artists as
yeah,
well, I believe,
yeah,
William.
yeah, Alexander Buchanan and Sidney Parkinson. Um, and also, I think they had like they even had their own secretaries and stuff. So it was like there was like uh, it was a whole host of people. I will say probably a couple of them probably shouldn't have been there, but anyway, that's a separate matter.
But
Uh,
can you imagine how exciting that would have been, William? To be like even an ordinary young sailor on HMS Endeavour, uh, setting out for the far side of the world for a 3-year voyage. Can you imagine to places people had never seen? Can you imagine how absolutely exciting and great that must have been?
well, if you were to like say like to me tomorrow, if you say like Angie, if you come around, if you were to like phone me up tomorrow and say, uh, William, I've got a rocket ship prototype. We're gonna go on like a 3-4 year expedition to Mars. We're gonna land on Mars, going to explore, and then come back. I mean, that's basically what you're saying.
Very much, very much so. Yeah, and of course, forget about press gangs. The war was over. The 7 Years' War was over. Cook didn't need a press gang to get a crew, not at all. He had more volunteers than he needed, and he was
it
actually able to pick out the best seamen.
it was the prestige. It was the all of these people, by the way, particularly if all these people, particularly the ones from the Royal Society who would have gone to university, they would have learnt from a very young age about, you know, the fable land of Terra Australis and this great southern continent, and to be the one person who to find it. I mean, forget about the whole claiming it bit, but to find it and record it and everything, it would be a massive coup, particularly not just for like the Royal Society, but for the individual himself, and also discovering, um, and they will. This is another thing. The reason why there was the Collier was selected, as you mentioned, the space, the chaps of the Royal Society would definitely wanted to bring things back with them because they knew there would
Oh
be things
yeah,
there.
absolutely. And of course, as the ship goes for its supplies, it's freeing up space in its hold, so it can bring a lot of stuff back.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
like
it's also worth pointing out that people like Banks would have done the grand tour when they were young men. They would have gone through Europe and particularly around the Mediterranean, they would have gone to their looked at ancient Roman and ancient Greek places and what have you. And so, yeah, this was kind of like these were quite civilized and educated men. Yes.
And for me, I mean, I sit here and thinking, I know it's going to sound mad, but if we abolish the NHS tomorrow, we could probably like do a mission to Mars in like a decade or so. It's not beyond the realm.
Easily, yes. Even Britain could easily, if only, William, if only.
Rupert Lowe, if you can hear us. Rupert Lowe,
Yeah.
if you could hear us,
that would be Britain going back to the great old days, like when we invented the jet engine and radar and had people like Captain Cook and Nelson. So yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
agree.
I not for real, because listen, I have no life. I have no social life or anything like that. If they said like you're going on a mission to like 4 years to Mars, I'd do it. I'd quite happily do it.
I'm not sure I'd be so keen on going to Mars, but you know what? Captain Cook's expedition. If someone came around to me today and said we're going to sail around the world on a sailing ship, would you come? I'd say yeah, please.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely.
Just immediately, I just go yes, please. Love it.
Yeah.
But then I love sailing anyway. I mean, it's great. As I said, I've sailed on that ship, so yeah. And it's very low, William. Even the captain's cabin at the stern there, you have to stoop if you're 6'2", like I am. So
Oh, I'm a bit taller than 6. I'm actually quite a bit taller than 6'2". So maybe I would have.
Yeah, you'd have to stoop. You'd have to stoop. No, you just get used to bowing your head after a while. You just do.
Yeah. I know Richard's saying going to Mars is not. If there was a possible route to go to Mars,
people are saying going to Mars is not possible. I think that the dude who runs X will do that. I really do.
Don't make me get the clip of Enoch Powell up when they say this isn't possible or that isn't possible. Whatever the British people require is always possible, Richard. Is always possible.
Yeah, absolutely correct, William. And people told Captain Cook that he couldn't do what he did, and Captain Cook just said, "No, we can." Anyway, we're talking. Richard Hughes in the chat is talking about and surviving. All right. One of the major problems of long sea voyages in Cook's time was scurvy, which is really nasty, by the way. Your gums loosen, your teeth fall out, you get vile smelling breath. Any old wound reopens. Like if you had a wound in your arm from years ago, it would reopen. Like Captain Cook, for example, had a wounded hand because a powder flask at one stage exploded in his hand. I think when he was flying, but I'm not sure. But so he got quite a badly wounded hand, and had he got scurvy, that all the old wounds on that hand would have opened up again. Loafer Sheffield is talking about limeys. Absolutely, we'll get onto that, Loafer. But Captain Cook's idea was two. Yes, he did take citrus fruit because people had worked out by this time that citrus fruit was the thing. But he also took sauerkraut, which had the same effect. It has vitamin C in it. And of course, the sailors didn't like it because it's not a British food. It's a German food, basically. I think he even flogged a couple of guys early on in the voyage because they refused to eat it. And Cook's argument was this. Cook's argument was, look, I intend to bring most of these guys home. Yeah, I want to go and do this voyage, but I want to bring my crew home. I don't want them to die halfway through the voyage.
I'm not going to lie, that is kind of ridiculous, refusing to eat it. Like, to
Yeah,
be flogged for, if you're going to be flogged for anything, refusing to eat a sauerkraut is kind of R-worded. You know, it
yeah,
is
but it
kind
was.
of.
Listen, William. Captain Crook was a pretty humane man, and you know they didn't get like I don't know 60 lashes or something. It was 12, I believe. And it was just because he said, "Look, I want to bring this crew home, and they have to eat what I tell them to eat because if they don't eat this shit, they won't come home. They'll get scurvy and they'll die."
Yeah. So,
And Cook was a very, very intelligent, sensible dude. You know.
yeah. So Cook sets sails and he reaches Cape Horn in the south, and particularly today it is he reaches a place called Tierra del Fuego, um, on the Cape Horn.
Yeah, that's way south of the Falkland Islands. It's a huge island, and it's
It's
terrible. And it's
it's
got
quite
some of the roughest seas in the whole wide world.
it is there's actually a Top Gear episode, their Argentinian special, where they go to Tierra del Fuego, and it's they even come in trouble with the seas. Funny enough though, in Tierra del Fuego, it is disputed. The islands are disputed because the Argentinians claim some of the Chilean side of it, if you believe it. It's not like the Argentinians to claim islands that don't belong to them. Yeah.
Interesting little side fact, William. If you watch the really excellent film Master and Commander from 2003, great film by the way. It's probably my second favorite film after Zulu. Um, they go around Cape Horn,
Yeah.
and the video that they show is actually going around Cape Horn, but it was taken from the ship from this ship from the Endeavour replica. The one in on the picture on the screen. She went around Cape Horn just like Cook did in the
Mm.
original Endeavour, and the film that they show you of Cape Horn and the rough seas, it's from the HMS Endeavour replica.
Yeah. Now, around Tierra del Fuego, or those sort of, the Cape Horn, is you have Magellan's Passage, and then further south you have um, is that Drake's
Yeah,
Passage as
because
well?
Magellan, the Portuguese guy, and Drake, the British guy, obviously the English guy, they use different ways of getting around Cape Horn. Yes.
Yeah, and for just sort of a point of clarity, this is where you.
By the way, guys, we will one day do a Sir Francis Drake stream.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to do
Absolutely. Yeah,
that.
we will
His
do that. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, there's so much with Sir Francis, it's incredible. And anyway, so and this, what's important to remember is this is where you have the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean meeting. This is like this is the meeting point of the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean. It's why the seas are so rough. It's why it's a particularly rough area. And it now in Master Commander in the film Iron Duke, there's a I think it's Russell Crowe's character, the captain, actually talks about how this is where you have the most vicious storms. Is that actually a true assessment that this is where you have particularly very vicious storms?
Yeah, it's really bad, and also all of the Southern Ocean, which is to say, if you go south of South America and the Falkland Islands, and you south of South America and the Falkland Islands, but north of the Antarctic, obviously, you can go around a long way below, say, the Cape in South Africa, and eventually get to New Zealand, and if you go up a bit to Australia, yeah, north of it. And those seas down there can be enormous, and the winds can be enormous, really like huge, you know.
Yeah.
You like the waves. If you're in a ship like Endeavour, yeah, and you can look at this ship and you can see her three main sails on her mainmast and her foremast. You can get waves much bigger than that ship.
Oh,
Much bigger.
yeah. So there you go. It gives you a clue.
The waves can be so big that when you're in the hollow between two of them, all your sails will just go slack because there's no wind in the hollow between the two waves. And then, of course, you come up and all of a sudden your sails are whammed with this enormous, 80-mile-an-hour wind or whatever it might be. Like really rough, really dangerous.
So while he was on Terra del Fuego, Cook composed his first anthropological essay, basically observing the Horsh people. So these are the people that live in these sort of island chains in the south there around Cape Horn and Tierra del Fuego. And you had the sort of Banks went ashore and, with some of his servants to collect the botanical specimens, very similar to what you saw again in the film Master and Commander, where you have the ship surgeon and the boy who had his arm amputated going sort of collecting like bugs and fauna and various things that have need to be identified and classed and what have you, and documented in particularly. But what happens is the two black servants who were with Banks, and depending on this was overnight excursions, give you a clue of how cold it was. I mean, this was they froze to death, the two black servants. So yeah.
Obviously not the various tools in the shed, but there we go. But the Indians on Tierra del Fuego, the Native Americans, if you prefer, are they were basically naked. They had blankets, but they were basically naked and lived in huts. It's one of the most miserable lives I can possibly think of on a place like Tierra del Fuego, which is not like tropical at all. It's very cold and windy and rainy. So yeah.
Yeah, it's I'm looking at pictures now. I mean, even most part of the year it's snow. You have like even like ice sheets, snow. It's pretty inhospitable, and genuinely not a great place to stop. And afterwards, the Endeavour goes on to stop at Tahiti, which is where the original the years previously from the Royal Society, very explorers arrived at, and would go on to, do sort of a recon before the main one. And they arrived in Tahiti on the 13th of April. Now, this was important because they had to get to Tahiti to observe the transit of Venus, which was the main, which publicly was the main purpose of the expedition. And this would provide a in some ways a complete and accurate understanding of the circumference of the planet, and this is why this was authorized.
This is the picture I've got up at the moment, guys. Is Cook's first voyage on HMS Endeavour, and you can see he comes out from England up here and goes down the east coast of the west coast. No, the east coast of South America, across the Pacific, up the east coast of Australia. This up here is around Batavia and the Dutch East Indies, and then he goes down around Cape Horn to come back up to Britain again. But that was his first voyage, and that took slightly over 3 years.
Yeah.
And of course, I hope you've been realizing, all these land masses that he goes past, he lands pies, he collects samples of the local plants and wildlife and what have you. So he's doing all this scientific stuff at the same time as he's exploring. By the way, I think it was kind of shown a little bit earlier by something William showed us, but the west coast of Australia, bits of that were kind of known because the Dutch had landed there largely by accident or shipwrecks. So there was an idea there was a bit of a coast here, but all the rest of this, which is actually Australia, no one knew anything about at all.
Yeah, no, true. And can you still hear me okay, Andrew?
Yeah, fine, man.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, and I will mention, because this is where we come into the realms of scummy left-wing arseholes, some of the worst people on the planet. Now, we would address this because it's quite, frankly, probably the most ridiculous thing anyway. But what you have is in Tahiti, there were like I guess sort of like friction between the natives on Tahiti and some of the crew. The one of it is, and this isn't, a lot of them will blame Captain Cook. Cook wasn't involved with this. Basically, two sailors took some sacred rocks, and that upset the Tahitians because it was some sort of I don't know, maybe like some sort of semi-religious or spiritual thing. Who knows? It doesn't really matter.
But they certainly didn't know that. The sailors wouldn't have realised that. And equally, the Tahitians used to nick things like they steal things like nails and what have you from a Royal Navy ship. I mean, it was just mutual uncomprehension.
Yeah. I mean, and the thing though is, given the view back then, if you were to, if they were to be able to translate saying, "Oh, the Tahitians are unhappy because your sailors took 2 rocks," they'll be like, "What?" So what? It'd be like, they'd be ridiculous and move on, sort of thing. But and you said that, so this, you had the back and forth, and he puts Cook, because he was looking out for the interest, because at this point Tahiti, other side of known civilization at this point, or any form of civilization at this point, is about keeping him and his crew alive. Sorry, Tahitians, you're gonna have to give back all the things you nicked. We don't tolerate that. Put it back. And
it wasn't major. There wasn't like large scale killing or anything. It was quite minor, really.
Basically, they got a bit of a telling off, which is probably they needed it, to be honest. Quite frankly, but given their behaviour, they're behaving like they needed a bit of stick. There's nothing wrong with a bit of stick.
Yeah, no, look, I as far as I can work out, Cook, for a mid-18th century guy, was extremely humane. He wasn't at all cruel. And I've never read even a lefty trying to say he was, because he wasn't. So,
Yeah, and also because he had like a couple deserters, and he did hold the chieftain hostage until they were sort of returned as well, along with stolen items. So there were things like that. But on the whole, it's not like it was genocide central that all these morons make it out to be,
Yeah,
anything like
he
that.
wasn't opening fire with cannon on the Tahitians. He never did that, not at all.
No. And so with that sorted out,
In fact, even later, William, when he lands on Australia and he gets Aboriginals throwing spears at his guys, yeah, and him. Yeah, he tells the Marines to fire over their heads, not to fire at them.
yeah, to scare them, to scare them
Yeah,
away.
he just wants to scare them. Even though they're trying to kill him with spears, he says, no, just fire over the head, scare them.
Yeah. And I mean, afterwards, they set sail. The Cook were then sort of sailed around nearby islands from around the main Tahiti island, claiming them for Britain, which is he named them the Society Islands, which is it's a cluster of smaller islands to the west of Tahiti. It's like Tapu and Bora Bora and Maputai and all that sort of stuff. And so you've got like this first sort of like British claim on the Society Islands, as it would be called. And then from there he would follow now, because the transit of Venus has been recorded, noted down, and this is where you have the secret orders. And so this is where Cook begins his search for the southern continent of Terra Australis. And his first point was he sailed to New Zealand in October 1769.
Which he discovers. I know that these days you're not supposed to say somebody discovered it because the Maori got there, okay, and killed off all the interesting animals.
That's excuse my language.
But they
such...
had no written language, and so did they discover it really? I mean, okay, they landed there, but whatever.
But the thing though is, I've even had like someone recently in relatively real world sense use that saying. I said the Captain Cook discovering Australia. Well, did he discover it because of these things? And it was like, okay, before this logical argument through, did the Aborigines know the circumference of the planet? Did they know the topography of their own continent? Did they or island chain? Did they know where London was?
Not hardly, mate. Not hardly. No.
Exactly. Captain Cook and his crew and the Royal Society, by being there and landing on it, discovered it because they were discovering the globe. The globe, which was a big mystery, did not become a mystery after that. Hence, they discovered it. And to suggest otherwise is just pedantic, moronic, low IQ, anti-white European bollocks, quite frankly.
Well, look, I will talk about this at the end of the stream, William, but Captain Cook statues and monuments are constantly targeted by anti-white lefties in Australia these days.
Yeah, it's been targeted in Australia.
It's funny because although there are cameras everywhere these days, they never manage to film these guys who do that. Isn't it funny?
Yeah. It's a convenience, isn't it? It's a convenient thing. So he lands. They land at Poverty Bay, and with a Tahitian who they brought with them on the expedition. And so Cook was the first European to communicate with the Maori, but there was sort of a violent. They were quite violent because of the Maori, and this is something worth noting. The Maori were very, very hostile to outsiders. They were very, very militaristic tribal society.
They
were cannibals.
yes, they were. All of that is true, but they also were hostile and militaristic and cannibals to other Maori as well. So,
Yeah. And so it resulted in, because of that, the Marines did shoot several Maori dead.
well, I mean, what were they supposed to do? Allow themselves to be killed? You know, sorry, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, it's like sorry, I can't shoot you because some overweight what white feminists and some Indian immigrant whose family arrived here 10 seconds ago in another couple hundred years will call me like will say that this was like a genocidal a genocidal incident. So sorry, let me, you can hack me to death and eat my liver, go ahead, Mr. Maori warrior. No, fucking bullshit. Yeah, no.
You may know, William, because you've been on my Discord a long time and you've been in this channel a long time. I used to live in Torres Strait, which is about there in Australia, between the Cape York and New Guinea. Yeah. And the Torres Strait Islanders, you go to any museum, there's a museum on Thursday Island. Go into that museum and you'll see these Torres Strait Islander knives, yeah, and they have a notch in them, and every notch is a head they took.
Yeah.
Right. So you'll get some, and these are like 18th, 19th century weapons. And some of them will have like 10 or 11 notches on them. So that's how many heads that particular warrior took. Mostly of other Torres Strait Islanders, it has to be said, although sometimes Aboriginals or New Guinea people,
No, true. And during his time in New Zealand, after the sort of shooting incident, Cook did try and go back to the Maori and do like friendly interactions and gifts exchanges, because this is the thing, everyone involved, including the Royal Society, knew that they were primitive and that they were going to be hostile, and basically wanted to show that they weren't going to be a threat or anything like that. And it didn't work out well, and there was still hostilities and return use of force.
but it was always in Cook's case, he only ever used force after the enemy did. He never used it first ever.
No, it's not like he turned up with a raiding party and started.
Yeah, and said, "Oh, shoot those guys." No, he never ever did that. That was bullshit. If people started chucking spears at him, Cook's first reaction was, "Fire over their heads, men." Yeah, and only if they continued to advance and continued to throw spears and what have you and arrows, then he would say, "Okay, we're going to have to shoot these guys because he can't get his own men killed. What sort of officer would he be if he did?"
But exactly. And because of the position and everything, that he decides to withdraw, because there's nothing they can really do. They haven't really got the numbers, or the Royal Society wanted to make contact, but it was kind of like, they don't want to make contact with us, or the only form of contact they want to have is club our heads. So
William, I'm not sure if we don't need to do a part 2 of this, because we're only halfway through his first voyage. So maybe we need to do a part 2 of this one. I also wanted to do some channel admin. Guys, please, if you're watching this now or later on, hit the like button, really helps. And if you want to support the channel, you can do so via Entropy. And you can also ask Super Chat questions there. And Entropy is pinned at the top of the chat on YouTube. I don't. What do you think, William? Do you think we should maybe do a part 2 of this stream to cover?
I think we should do part 2. We just finished with the New Zealand bit, and then
Oh yeah,
part 2
no,
we can
look, I,
begin with.
I want to finish his first voyage, but he did two
right,
more after that. And I'm
Yeah.
just thinking, if we do that, we're going to go 3 hours, which is rather too long for a history stream.
All right, fair enough. Okay, so we just finished with New Zealand. We get on to Australia because that's kind of like why we're all here. So after sort of withdrawing from the Tarangu River, which is in the city of Gisborne in modern day Gisborne, they end up sailing north on the Endeavour and anchor at Mercury Bay on the 9th of November. And this is where Cook and the Royal Society observed the transit of Mercury. And during this time, Cook claims the bay for Britain. That there is an official claiming for Britain. And then following that, on January in the new year, in 1770, Cook arrives at Queen Charlotte Sound, which is on the north coast of New Zealand, southern island, on the South Island, which again he claims for Britain, and also very importantly becomes a very important post for future voyages and waves of settlers. But that's a separate bit, and this is where Cook, by the way, he hears from other stories from some other Maoris of cannibalism, and it's confirmed by some like scouts, marine scouts, and everything that there is between the tribes when there's a battle or what have you, that there is a form of cannibalism.
William, sorry to interrupt you. Can I just point out something that's really strange? The Maoris, according to most people, probably arrived in New Zealand in the 13 or 1400s. Okay.
Yeah.
There are people who say later than that. There are people who say a little bit earlier than that. But it was basically around. And they are regarded as indigenous to Australia. Sorry, to New Zealand.
To New Zealand, yeah.
Yeah. But the English and the Anglos and the Saxons and everybody else got to Britain in the 700s at the very latest, and actually probably earlier than that.
Well, is that 400? The earliest is 400.
Yeah. But it was the earliest Anglo-Saxons, and who was the other group?
The Jutes.
The Jutes. Thank you. That was
Saxons,
it. Was the Jutes? Yeah. Those guys actually started arriving in Britain before the Romans left. Yeah. And somehow we're not indigenous, though. Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
Compared to the Maori in New Zealand. Don't you think that's funny? I do.
It is. And what do you think the Maori did to the original inhabitants of New Zealand?
I don't know that there were any, to be honest with you, William, but, whatever. But I'm not sure there were, like, human inhabitants of New Zealand before that.
I mean, I will give that there is sort of like archaeological
and also William, I don't think it matters. Like, if you arrive in the 1300s and you're regarded as indigenous, and bear in mind, this is like we're talking about, say, the time of Cressy or Poitiers or Agincourt. This is when the Maoris arrive in New Zealand. Yeah, but the Englishmen, the Angles and the Saxons and the Jutes started arriving in Britain in the 400 or 500s.
Yeah.
But we're not indigenous, supposedly, according to lefty bastards.
Well,
You know?
the Maori quite literally invaded the Shire and ate all the hobbits.
Yeah,
Possibly.
it's just crazy. To me, it's just crazy.
From
You
my
know, and
understanding,
it's such an obvious double standard. You know.
yeah, I mean, probably in a similar way to like Anglo-Saxons, you had the Maori who arrived and they would come across places where weren't inhabited, which they would settle and claim for themselves, and then they would have come. I think in the North Island, particularly, there is signs of a a pre-civilization, and whatever happened to them happened. But the thing is, you go into this time period and time periods before, I mean, look how when the Spanish came across the Latin Americas. The reason why they call them savages wasn't because of some like racial purity thing. It's because genuinely they were societies built on cannibalism, on rape style religious worship. I mean, stuff which is unimaginable today. Like people
What
bushwhack.
wasn't cool to be an Aztec prisoner of war when they took you up to the top of that pyramid
uh,
and cut your heart out while you were
by
alive?
your life.
Wasn't cool.
No, absolutely not. And the liberals today get really uppity with things going on in the world today, and you have people even like the centre right sort of morons who will sort of cater to a lot of this, who will go witter on about like the worst excess of Islam and everything. I mean, quite frankly, you think the Middle East is savage pre-Columbian America and the Pacific. Yeah, I mean, quite frankly, I think a lot of these guys were very restrained for what they had to see and deal with. Quite frankly,
Well, Cook certainly was because, as we pointed out, his initial reaction to being attacked by native people was to get his Marines to fire over their heads. That's not really genocidal, is it? It's kind of like,
no,
I want to protect my crew because that's kind of my job, but I don't want to kill these fucking idiots,
100%, 100%. And yes, they confirmed stories of cannibalism, the crew, and he managed to circumnavigate of the coast of, I think it was the South Island and the southern portion of the Northern Island North Island as well, and mapping pretty much most of the coastline around New Zealand in about like 2 months.
He on his subsequent voyages, he often wintered in New Zealand.
Yes, yeah, particularly the Mercury Bay, which became quite a bit of a hotspot for that travelers and everything, probably because of where it's positioned in between the two islands. Yeah, and of course we go on to
Australia.
yeah, Australia. So on 19th of April 1770, Point Hicks was sighted, and that was the first sort of noting down of Australia. Now, where is this? Like, this is Victoria, isn't it? This is modern. Point Hicks is in Victoria.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and this was the first time European encountered Australia's eastern coastline. So there's all western coastline being known. This is the eastern coastline, and
People, William knew a little bit about the West Australian coast because Dutch East Indian ships had been shipwrecked there, basically. But they had no idea that it was part of a huge continent, for example.
Yes, and while sailing the coast, Cook and others were making notes of landmarks, the terrain, and also Cook saw several Aborigines on the shore, but wasn't close enough to make direct contact. Though he does note in his diary that they very much saw him because they sort of went running off as soon as they saw the ships. Because imagine, these sorts of people if they see a ship.
Well, I
Yeah,
mean, look at the ship in the picture, and
yeah.
the only vessels that the Aboriginals had were dugout canoes. So yeah, would have been a bit.
They probably think it's like a sea monster or something like that. It's
Yeah, they would have absolutely thought that for sure.
yeah. Um, a bit like I mean, even the Aztecs, who was they were more advanced as a society than the Aborigines. They thought that originally that this was like that their gods returning um, from the sea or something like that. So
Before the British settled Australia, the most complicated structure on the whole of the continent was a bark hut or a dugout canoe. There was nothing else, like
yeah,
literally nothing else. In thousands and thousands of years, the Aboriginals had invented nothing.
yes, yeah, 100%. And on the 29th of April, the crew of the Endeavour and Cook himself make landfall at Botany Bay, um, with the hope of making direct contact with Aboriginal Australians. Um,
They also saw the first kangaroos that had never been
Kangaroos,
seen before, all sorts of other things as well. Many plants.
and
One of the famous plants in Australia is called a banksia, named after Joseph Banks.
yeah, and uh, he met Aboriginals. He did meet Aboriginal. I think they're just trying to bring up the Gaweagle tribe from the Gaweagle clan or tribe or what have you, um, who uh, you had like a sort of brief confrontation with warriors, but one of them was wounded by a shot. But on the whole, they were not as hostile as the Maori, and there was a form of contact, that they could
Sure.
open up.
Cool.
And as you mentioned, now this was one story that I heard that one of the crew, when they were with some of the Aborigines, pointed towards a kangaroo, and they saw the kangaroo sort of like hopping on his way, and they said, "Oh, what is that?" And the Aborigine says kangaroo, and I think in their language, the Aborigine is saying, "Oh, look at him go." Um,
Yeah, that sort of
yeah,
thing was pretty common. Well,
and
yes.
the crew thought, "Oh, that's what they're called." That's their name, and there was, so you have like that sort of miscommunication. But again, stuff like that happened quite frequently. It happened with Spain and other countries as well. Similar sort of miscommunications of names and uh, animals and things like that. So, and yeah, effectively the Banks and the others, they would stay at Botany Boo for a week, exploring in the surrounding areas, collecting water, timber, and fodder and specimens. Uh, Cook spent his time establishing sort of like a relations with the Aboriginal. people. Again, not killing, murdering, looting, or enslaving, as all these other fuckers like to make out. And goes
No,
really out of his way.
he didn't do any of that. He would give them things like cloth and nails, and they would sometimes give him some very simple Aboriginal tools, things like boomerangs and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and shall I bring up the hold on a sec. Let me bring up the famous painting of this like meeting. You'll recognize it, Iron Duke, no doubt. Are you able to share it, Iron Duke? Yeah. So here you go. This is where he they're sort of firing shots, which wounds the warrior, and you're having I've seen now I've seen people saying that this was actually in this one you see Cook sort of telling
Cook's trying to tell his men not to fire. Yes, he is.
not to cease fire and not to aggravate them, because this would similar problems from New Zealand might arise here as well. And after this they're able to have dialogue with the Aborigines.
Cook goes on up the east coast of Australia, and eventually he ends up grounding his ship on the Great Barrier Reef.
Yes, I've got that picture here as well, actually, because
Yeah,
is this is it Buster's Bay or somewhere like that?
yeah, I've been there actually on an East Coast prawn trawler. Would you believe?
I've got it. I've got I'm sharing the picture here of
Hang on, I'll get it. There you go.
Yeah, so
There you go.
this is the camp that was made, and also you see like the rowing boat, and this was beach, and this was the repair work that had to be done to HMS Endeavour.
You can see the Endeavour here.
Yeah.
And this is why these coal ships being flat bottomed was a good idea, because you could beach them and they wouldn't tip over too badly when they were left high and dry by the tide.
Yeah. And didn't Cook have to order all excessive weights to be thrown overboard, which was included like several cannons? Iron Duke.
Sorry, you couldn't hear me. Yes, he did. He chucked some of his guns overboard and what have you. But he then went back, once he'd repaired his ship, he went back and he fished them up again. He was he was a great seaman. He really was one of the greatest Royal Navy skippers, Captain Cook.
Yeah. And this is where they observed the kangaroo for the first time. I think one kangaroo was killed as well, so they could be taken.
They would because they used to take a specimen home so people could see it.
Yeah.
There is still a town up here in the north of Australia, because this is in the north of Australia. There's still a little town, and it's really pretty actually. It's a nice little place. I've been there, called Cooktown on the Cape York Peninsula.
Yeah.
It's north of Cairns. Cairns is probably the last big town in Australia, but go north of that, you eventually come to a place called Cooktown, and that's quite close to this. And it's still quite a nice little place, actually. I liked it anyway.
Yeah. They did make brief contact with the locals at their Buster Bay and the Great Barrier Reef, where they had to sort of beach, but they sort of didn't really remain and have any sort of significant contact with Cook. The only time is there were shots fired and one wounding of the Aborigine. And this was over fighting sailors and Royal Society men over green turtles, for specimen, like taking green turtles.
You've got to remember that even in the 19th century, the Cape York Aboriginals would still attack the white dudes who were in the telegraph offices on the Cape York Peninsula, even in the 19th century. So they were more warlike than many Aboriginals, to be honest.
Yeah, and you see that, even in like the Indians in America, like the Comanche, were way more warlike than some of the other tribes that.
William, if you drive up Cape York today, and when I did it, it was still a dirt road. I'm not sure if it is now because this was more than 25 years ago. But when I did it, it was still a dirt road up to the tip of Cape York. And there are these old 19th century telegraph offices, like 2 or 3 of them on the way up. And they're forts. They made them as forts because the Aboriginals used to attack them in the 19th century. So, they've got firing ports and stuff in the side of them.
Yeah, so they continue at the northeast tip of Australia, Cape York, and then at that point, Cook sort of took stock and of what he had identified, and he then officially claimed the entire Australian coast. There'd been the coastline that he had surveyed as British territory.
Quite right too.
Yeah. And officially, and also naming the island Possession Island as well, which he's come across.
Pretty sure he didn't he name New South Wales. I think so.
Yeah, that was that on his first voyage? I think he actually he referred.
Yeah,
to
I think because when he was at Botany Bay, I think he named it New South Wales. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, he referred to it as New South Wales, and then later on he claimed the entire coastline British territory. I mean, effectively, declaring the entire of Australia British territory.
Yeah, like this picture that's up at the moment, that's Queensland these days. But Queensland was only named many years later. So, and after Queen Victoria, of course, as is where the state I live in, Victoria, is named after Queen Victoria, basically.
And then on the way back home to England, they left their Possession Island, and they went westward towards the Torres Straits.
He went through the Torres Strait, then he went to the Dutch East Indies, and then he went along via Cape Town under Africa and then back up the Atlantic to Britain again.
Yeah, St. Helena, stopped at St. Helena briefly, and
Yeah, basically over a 3-year voyage, but what an adventure. And he lost very few of his crew. This was the remarkable thing about this over 3-year voyage. Cook lost only a handful of men.
Yeah, 23, I think, and most of it was. I mean, which I know people say, "Oh, that sounds it's quite low." On the grand scheme of things, it's quite a low number.
It's really low compared to earlier things. Look, if you look at the Anson expedition, where Admiral Anson captured the Spanish treasure galleon, he took a fleet out and he brought one ship back with a very tiny crew. Now, on the way back, he captured a Spanish treasure galleon. This was in the early 18th century. And as a result, even the ordinary seaman in his crew became rich from prize money. Yeah. But that was because most of his fleet had been killed by scurvy and what have you during his voyage. Not Anson's fault. People didn't know back then. But Cook's voyage, as you say, he lost 20 odd guys out of a crew of 100 or something. Yeah.
And most of it was down to the normal thing which people would get even, you know, in England. Elsewhere was dysentery, tuberculosis, and
it was just diseases
like
they couldn't. Yeah. It was diseases they couldn't treat in the 18th century, basically.
Yeah.
He,
I mean,
he brought the vast majority of his crew home safely after over 3 years on the far side of the world. It was brilliant. It was just brilliant what he did.
It was. And the funny thing is, even though, you know, as we know, Australia, or New South Wales, as he would go on to refer to it, and the subsequent coastline, he still, technically, in his mind and many people's mind, they did not find Terrace Australis. They did not find the fabled southern great continent.
People thought it was much larger than it actually is.
Yes.
Even though Australia is actually pretty big. I mean, Australia is actually about the same size as the United States minus Alaska. It's pretty damn big, but the middle of it is mostly desert and semi-desert. But it's a pretty damn big place. But yeah, they weren't sure that they found it. Although later on, of course, we'll talk about this on our next stream, William. Cook's second and third voyages kind of firmed up what they found.
So this is from a couple centuries before. I just want to find. I'm just showing another map. So this is what, in Cook's mind, I mean, he would have known that it wouldn't have been accurate at all. But you see, basically, what Antarctica. I mean, basically, what you're looking at is Antarctica. But the Great Southern Land. This is it, and this is when you come to the second voyage, and so on. But this
we'll leave that for our next stream, William.
Yeah.
Which we may or may not do next week, but we'll do a part 2 of this because I think it's been interesting. Yeah, so Cook was a pretty extraordinary individual, a very real British hero, and I just say fuck you to all the anti-white leftists who don't like it, basically.
So just to be clear, he returned to England on the 12th of July, 1771, anchoring at the Downs, which is of Kent, in Kent, in August, and he was promoted to the rank of commander on his return.
Yeah, people don't realise that on his first voyage he was only a lieutenant. For his second voyage he was a master and commander. And then, of course, on his third voyage he was promoted to captain. But yeah, extraordinary man, who every British guy should be proud of. He was really cool.
I mean, Richard in chat, the Medici, the Romans, the Greeks and the Romans talked about it. They talked about the great.
Yeah, the Greek, one of the Greek mathematicians did a calculation that gave a relatively accurate idea of the circumference of the world.
Was it Archimedes?
I'm not sure if it was Archimedes, but it was certainly one of the Greek mathematicians.
Yeah.
Came up with a pretty accurate idea of the world's circumference.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't totally accurate, but it wasn't far off.
I mean, it's Antarctica. It's basically what those maps are. It's Antarctica, but for them they thought it was just great. Yeah, this actual continent. And look, Cook and his expedition, in some ways, would go on, as multiple ones, would answer that great mystery that had gone from antiquity to his time.
For sure. Yeah, no, I totally agree. Anyway, guys, I think that's probably our part one of Captain James Cook, Royal Navy. We'll do a part two of this for his second and third voyages. Extraordinary man, great British hero, he used to be greatly celebrated in Australia and New Zealand. These days, your lefty arse people pay him. And some of them claim to be Aboriginals, but they're usually about, 15% Aboriginal. They're basically Antifa types, really. I remember last time I was in the middle of Melbourne, there's one place where there's a statue of a Royal Australian Navy sailor from World War II that got defaced. A statue of Captain Cook got defaced. Then I remember a year or so ago, statue of Captain Cook got actually hacked down. And amazingly, none of the millions of cameras that we have these days managed to record any of the faces of the arses that did it. Conveniently enough, of course, because it's just anti-white racism, and our government support that. Basically, they just do. But William, would you like to plug your channel, sir?
Yeah, so check out William Grenville and formerly Ayrshire Tory. I do odd videos, points in the week when I can, talking about mainly being about contemporary politics and things, but just things that other things I have interest in, and
you had a good video, William. You had a good video last week, and you were looking at the people attacking Restore Britain, I believe.
Yeah, the funny thing is, we talk about there are multiple angles that, and this is something the reason why, and I don't know if it was an Australian politician back in the I think it was in the 20s or 30s, saying that Australia is a British society and they should treat it as a citadel against outside. With Britain, with our country, with Australia, with the Commonwealth, the Anglo nations, you get attacked by all different angles, not just the left, but also people who claim to be on the right.
What you mean, like the reform idiots? Yes, I know what you mean, man.
Yeah, and even by people in Australia who I know you I don't know what your view on him entirely is, Andrew, but he's that half Lebanese fella that is I see every now and then who sort of likes to say, we're not English. What? Yeah, you're not English, mate. You're definitely not.
Well,
English,
he is, no, absolutely.
Yeah, so you got that right. But you say Australia has no connection to Britain and all that sort of nonsense. There is attack on that identity throughout, and I do like Aussie Pill. He's done a lot to hammer home the British roots of Australia, that it didn't exist in a vacuum. It didn't just materialise out of some sort of free marketplace of ideas, bollocks, or things like that. There is a connection to this, and quite frankly, the only way that our countries, Australia and Britain, and the Commonwealth at large, should go forward is reconnecting. I mean, hell, there are.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm a big hands up supporter.
I will say this, Andrew. I saw in America, particularly with the recent St. Patrick's Day parades they do there, and I noticed a few followers of mine have been like sharing it. There has been a massive uptick in IRA sympathy parades, particularly at this St. Patrick's Day, and really because they had the Irish Taoiseach or president visiting or what have you. There has been a lot of American signalling to attacking are Ulster brothers, and basically literally calling for the same bollocks that they like to cry cry about their own victimhood over, of like forms of genocide and stuff. And quite frankly, I'm sick of them. I'm sick of these people, and we need to start biting back. We need to start biting back.
Yeah, fair enough. I like the British Australian Society. I follow those guys on X, on Twitter. Excellent group. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
great.
Australia was founded by Brits, so was New Zealand, so was Canada,
Yeah,
and some frogs in Canada's case. But yeah,
we have to. We have to. I mean, the Quebecois. They're sort of like I like the sort of retarded son you keep locked away in the
well,
cellar,
that's
sort of.
that's probably a bit of an exaggeration, William. But
That
okay.
probably, but the thing, but the yeah, they sort of French. But the thing though is, yeah, on a serious note, that and I've noticed in some funny way, Mark Carney recently has sort of or in his election campaign that got him elected, did a lot of like signaling saying Canada was founded by British and the French and stuff, and it's like, well, he's halfway there. He was halfway there, I guess. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But no, look, I think people who destroy Captain Cook's statue should get 5 years in prison. That's what I think. But anyway, that's just me.
well,
Um,
the reason they, I think one of the worst things. I mean, the reason they do it is to get a reaction from people like us, which they do, which the frustrating thing is they do, but they also
hmm.
do it because they have it's not them, it's the state, it's the modern Australian state and governing body that allows them to do it. Okay, and when King Charles went to Australia fairly recently, he gave a speech in I think it was in Parliament, and you had some uh, half-caste loony who stood up and started shouting. Now, whatever you think of Charles, and whatever you think of, and I don't think much of King Charles and everything else
Me
at all.
neither. Me neither.
I don't. But one thing I will say is, there is no circumstance when some half-caste fucking interloper, disgusting mutant should ever be raising her voice and shouting at a monarch. There is no circumstance where any of that should have happened, and that was humiliating. And quite frankly, King Charles should have fucked decorum, stood up, and walked out, and not. I would have a bit more modicum of respect if
I,
him and
I,
the Queen just
I
walked
don't
out.
disagree with you, William. Insofar as my politics in Australia, I support Pauline Hanson and Australia First. Um, you know,
Yeah, fair enough.
one nation. That's what I support in Australia.
Yeah.
In general terms, this channel supports Restore Britain. Rupert Lowe, aim high, vote low. Restore Britain. That's the absolute. They're the people we support in Britain. Certainly the people I support. I think it's the people William supports, and most of the people on my channel. Restore Britain are the real deal. They're not the Mark II Conservative Party that Nigel Farage wants to make reform into Reform UK. But yeah, whatever. Anyway, guys, thank you very much to my guest, William Granville. Do go and check out his channel. I'll put a link into it, up to it later on. And we will do a part 2 of this stream for Cook's second and third voyages. Not sure if it will be next week. We'll see what people want to do on my Discord. But we will be back on Saturday for our normal Splendid Isolation current affairs and news and politics stream, which I can recommend. been doing it for a while, and they're usually quite fun these days. So do come and join us for that, guys. And in the meantime, don't let the bastards grind you down.